Today is Sukkot, and I call the message the mystery of the Moedim. You know, when I was growing up, there were people around me who were religious, not religious, but everyone understood that Yom Kippur was the holiest day of the year. That's what we thought. That all we needed to do was to listen to Kol Nidre, to hear the sounding of the shofar, to fast if we were old enough, and then all would be well for the next year. It was only many years later that I learned the truth about God's Moedim, his appointed times. We're now celebrating the first day of Sukkot, which was and still is considered less important by most of the Jewish community. As a matter of fact, just this past week, I read an article about it on a Judaica website. One of the subtitles said, "Is Sukkot a high holiday?" Their answer was an emphatic no. They wrote, the two major holidays, commonly referred to as the high holidays, or Yamim Noraim in Hebrew, are Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. However, Sukkot is one of the Shalosh Regalim, the three pilgrim festivals. I was so frustrated when I read that. And I thought, how sad that they don't read the Torah. They have no idea about its true significance, and they are putting words in God's mouth. Nowhere in the Torah does it say that any one of God's appointed times is higher or greater than the rest. They are all equal and all contain special, even mystical messages about God's love, his provision, and why we can trust him. That's why they're called chukim. Going to synagogue one day a year on Yom Kippur is like going to church one day a year at Christmas. It may soothe our guilt. We may feel better about ourselves, but it does nothing to bring us closer to our Creator. Leviticus 22:26 to 23:44 are the readings for one of the readings for this day. And we read it on the first day of Sukkot. It describes the 7 feasts which were fixed for us by our Creator. They begin with the weekly Shabbat. Most of my friends and my very large extended family do not observe Shabbat, probably because what religion has done to it. Orthodox Judaism has added so many injunctions that Shabbat has become more of a burden than what it was meant to be, a sign of God's existence. Other religions have either changed the day or completely ignored it, and in so doing, they are ignoring him. They're replacing the God of Israel with their gods and replacing his day with their special days. Without realizing it, his order is being turned into chaos. The rest of the Moedim are also Shabbats, and the message emphasized on each of them is that we are not to perform any salaried work on certain days, usually the first and the last day. In this way, we would learn to trust him and to understand that he is the one who provides for us. When we don't, and we worry about how we're going to earn our living, the stress can lead to physical and emotional illness. So who are supposed to keep these Moedim? Are they just for us, the Jews? No. The Torah says that there is only one Torah for the native-born citizen of the land and the ger, the stranger living among us. Like Rabbi Akiva, he was a proselyte, or the prophet Obadiah, also a proselyte. Or Ruth, the great-grandmother of King David, she was a Moabite. It's a condition of the heart, a desire for a relationship with the Almighty, not a conversion to another religion for whatever reasons they have. The next appointed feast in our portion is Pesach. It's only one day. We begin the evening before with our Seder, where we read a magnificent story to remind us that we are never to forget the fact that we were slaves and our exodus from Egypt to freedom. It's an amazing picture that serves as the prototype of how all our future generations would live in the diaspora, so that hopefully we would learn from the mistakes of our ancestors. The formula goes something like this, the formula of this prototype. We move to a foreign land where we live simply at first. We work hard and we try to hold on to the precepts of our forefathers. But then we begin to prosper and we multiply. And when we grow fat, we spoil our children, not wanting them to suffer as we did. We forget our Creator because prosperity blinds our eyes. And we begin to believe that we got there on our own strength. We become enchanted, entranced with the foreign way of life because it's more fun. And we want to be like them, uttering the words, "Let God choose someone else for a change." And instead of being example to our host nation about the one and only Creator, we choose to become like them, to fit in, to not make waves. They soon grow jealous of us and turn against us to the point of wanting to destroy us. So we cry out, not for our Heavenly Father, not for Avinu Shebashamayim, but we cry out to be able to return to our comfort. However, our cries are to no avail until finally our Heavenly Father turns his eyes back toward us when he knows we've had enough. And once again, he rescues us. And so this pattern repeats throughout the centuries, mimicking the original story of Pesach. Now, Pesach, remember, which is just one day, is followed by Chag HaMatzot, which consists of 7 days of eating unleavened bread, called matzah. And we eat no leaven. That's it. That's all we have to do. But once again, Orthodoxy has taken this festival captive, adding one regulation after another that would discourage anyone without enough resolve, because the burden is simply too great. The Creator's message in the Torah, however, is much more simple. All he's asking for us to do, humble ourselves and trust him. Leaven represents our pride that won't allow us to trust anyone but ourselves. But the Torah's message to humble ourselves is so that we won't fall like Pharaoh did, whose pride destroyed him and his entire nation. Now, the last of these 3 Moedims is Shavuot, a festival of thanksgiving, of the ingathering of the harvest to thank the Creator for his provision. But do we? Instead, we've created new gods, and our version of this appointed time, depending upon which group we follow. But now we find ourselves in the second set of the Moedim, beginning with Yom Teruah, the day of the sounding of the shofar, reminiscent of those blasts of a heavenly shofar as Moses ascended Mount Sinai in the cloud of lightning and thunder atop a burning mountain. It sends chills to the body. The shofar is a call for us to pay attention. Symbolic heavenly gates open, and we as one people called to gather together to seek God's forgiveness for not being the community that he created us to be, and for not keeping our word when we all said, "All that you say we will do." We're too selfish. We're too self-centered. We prefer to follow our own path instead of his. We don't like what he tells us to do, even if it's for our good. We sing the Kol Nidre on Erev Yom Kippur as a promise to not make vain oaths during the year and to ask forgiveness for the ones we made during the past year. That's what Yeshua was referring to when he said, "Let your yes be yes and your no be no. Anything other than these is evil." Do we think that God cares that we fast on Yom Kippur when we think nothing of breaking our word? Or worse, his word. And now we come to the end of the Moedim, the festival of Sukkoth, which our Rabbi called the end and a new beginning. That is a perfect picture of what God has set in motion for us. Whenever we think that we've done something so bad that causes us to cry out, oh no, it's all over, I've blown it this time. All we need to do is turn around, to face him, to face ourselves, to face our neighbor, to make things right with him, with ourselves and them, and we get to begin again. We may suffer the consequences, but we are not a lost cause. Our prophet Zechariah in the Haftorah portion told us that in the future, God would gather all the nations to Jerusalem for war. He allows our enemies to rise up against us because we refuse to pay attention to the one who made us, who formed us as a people in the womb of that foreign nation, Egypt. The plagues that hit Egypt were like birth pains, which finally allowed Israel to be born into freedom. The world has been experiencing birth pains over the millennia, which are growing in intensity. We are experiencing another set at this very moment. Are we in the final set of birth pains right now? Is this when God will set his feet on the Mount of Olives and the valley will split in two with a great earthquake? Who knows? Maybe, perhaps it is, but Yeshua, like Zechariah said, that only our Heavenly Father knows the day. We certainly must have thought that when Hitler was trying to annihilate us over 80 years ago, and the Sephardic Jews might have thought the same thing during the Inquisition in Spain over 500 years ago. But you and I, we don't need to concern ourselves with where we are in human history. All we need to know is what Zechariah 14:9 says, and the Lord shall be king over all the earth. In that day, Adonai Echad, Ushmo Echad, the Lord shall be one and his name one. Our Creator is the only God, and his name, Yud He Vav He, is the only name for all humanity to call upon. You know, there's a precious mystery about this time of year, and it alludes to a book of life. If there was a wealthy man living in your neighborhood, and every week he would walk up and down those streets and write in his book the names of those who he thought would be worthy enough to inherit some of his wealth, wouldn't we be on our best behavior, wanting desperately to get his attention so that our name could get into his book? How much more should we desire to obey God's Torah, to obey his principles, his commandments, and rejoice because our names are written in the Creator's book of life? Let's think of that when we feel unworthy. There are so many stories from people who have had near-death experiences and have described the most wondrous sensation of shalom, peace beyond measure on the other side of death. They know that death is only a door and that we are awaiting the redemption of mankind and this, his planet. This body is like a sukkah, a temporary dwelling, and at the resurrection of the dead, beginning at the Mount of Olives, we can look forward to having a permanent, eternal body, whatever that will look like. That's a picture of Sukkoth. If I were to choose one of his Moedim to be a little more special, it would be Sukkoth. Zechariah 14:16 tells us that all those of those nations who were left after they warred against Jerusalem would come up each year to keep the feast of Sukkoth, to worship and to bow down in homage to the King Adonai Tzevaot, the Lord of hosts. The Moedim God's appointed seasons are not just for us as individuals. Rather, they are for the community of humanity. These are the times of heightened awareness of the reality of his existence. No one else but him holds the solution for restoring this planet. After all, he created it, and he created us. Our part is to focus our lives on obeying his commandments, on celebrating his Moedim, on learning how to trust him, and giving him thanks for his provision. He will do the rest. Chag Sameach.